Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. How can Donald Trump and Trumpism still have a grip on so many Americans, even as investigations paint him as a leader who wanted himself to storm the U.S. Capitol and stop the peaceful transfer of power? Let's get to the bottom line. This week, the congressional hearings into the events of January 6, 2021 wrap up their summer session. That was the day that hundreds of supporters of former President Donald Trump stormed Congress in a last-ditch effort to prevent his own Vice President, Mike Pence, from certifying Joe Biden's election as president. Biden had won, but that hadn't stopped Trump from claiming that the election was stolen and from encouraging his supporters to fight to overturn the results. Till this day, there are millions of Americans out there who insist that Donald Trump won. They still attend his political rallies across the country, and he still has a grip on the Republican Party, and he might even run for president again. But does all this mean that Americans no longer believe in their own institutions and democratic processes? Does it matter anymore? Or is winning the only thing that matters? Today, we're talking with a former Republican political strategist who had a front row seat inside American politics for more than a decade. He is Tim Miller, and he's just come out with a new book on his experiences, Why We Did It, a travelogue from the Republican road to hell. Tim, thank you so much for joining us. I don't think there's a book on politics that I've read recently that reminds me more of George Orwell's Animal Farm, of people who feel self-entitled to go in and really detach themselves from the outcomes of that. You write in your book, the first line, America never would have gotten into this mess if it weren't for me and my friends. Tell us why.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve. The political culture in Washington, but particularly in Republican Washington, slowly but surely over the period of about the 20 years that I write about, became increasingly nihilistic, increasingly focused only on winning over losing, increasingly unconcerned about maintaining our democratic norms, about governing for all voters, not just the people that voted for you. And slowly over time, I think this nihilistic attitude both inflamed the base voters that we were campaigning to, and set the stage for somebody like Donald Trump, who was much better at all of this than these nerdy DC political staffers, to come and to channel the anger and the grievances of the Republican voters and take over the party. And that's exactly what he did. And I think that everything that we saw on January 6th, couldn't have been predicted, of course, in 2008, but our actions, over that 14-year period, very much led directly to it, because we essentially created a Republican electorate that decided that believed that this was necessary, because they were made to believe that their fellow Americans were evil and that winning was more important than protecting the American institutions, the American way of life.
I want our audience to try to have a leap of faith here and understand something that you wrote in the beginning of the book. It's one of the most interesting beginnings because you're very introspective, you're very honest, your writing is very raw, and you talk about yourself and the cadre you ran with as being political killers, that you were not really worried about principles or the health of democracy or who was the better candidate. You were out there to go for the jugular and to win. And I think that's an important dimension, because I think as we talk to you today, and you're so reasonable, and you've come to a point of introspection in this that usually people who come out of jail or were recently indicted do, like Michael Cohen or something. But I just want people to understand the real tension out there among some of the people you're writing about and about your own history.
Yeah, I was. Look, everyone gets into politics, almost everyone, with a little bit of earnestness, right? Like, I bought in as a young person into the shining city on the hill and kind of this gauzy version of America that Republicans were selling, and individual liberty and the importance of that and free people. So I got into politics with some earnestness, but very quickly, in Washington, if you want to succeed, you have to I've become good at the game of politics. If you're going to succeed on the campaign side, which is where I came out of. And slowly, but then eventually very fast, I determined that being a political hitman, being good at tearing down the left, being good at dropping, negative pieces of information in the media, being good at the witty bon mot was more important than actually telling the truth and actually getting candidates elected that were concerned about serving the public first. And so this was the culture that was created, and it was, I'm just going to be honest, like I was pretty good at that. I was pretty good at a witty one-liner, right? I was pretty good at delivering a negative attack, and so you just start to not think about it, and not think about the ramifications, and I just have regrets about that, because if you look at the politicians now, all of these things that I criticize about the political culture that led to Trump is still true on steroids. And look at, if you're a Ted Cruz or a Marjorie Taylor Greene, like you get more benefit from trolling and being mean and coming up with a funny tweet, than you do from saying, okay, what's a solution that we can get to? How can we alleviate people's problems? And that is, I think, the obvious end point of a culture that we created.
So you go through this thing of talking to friends about why they weren't able to see what you saw, and you believe that Donald Trump was deeply dangerous to the United States and its democracy. I'm just interested, as you look at this, and you talk to these friends, what was going on in their mind? How have you organized them? Why are they not where you are?
There are a handful of reasons, and I kind of lay out in the book a little bit of a field guide to all of their different rationalizations. Some of them are defensible, I think, if wrong. There are people that decide that they, that it's better to be on the inside than on the outside, right? Nudging things the right direction. If I leave, a crazy person's going to replace me. There's some people who are middle-aged, their kids are going to college. Like, this is my career. What else am I going to do? How am I going to change my life? It's not easy. I think that's true. Then there are more selfish reasons, right? Obviously, money, power. But the thing that surprised me the most, that I think was evident in my conversation with Caroline, we spent 7 hours drinking tequila, trying to get to the truth about this, and finally, I just kind of say to her, like, is there anything that really drives you that it's positive about the Trump administration? And she thinks about it for a second, and she's like, no, it's really all negative. Like, I'm so sick of the liberals driving their Priuses and wagging their finger at me and drinking their coffee culottes out of their paper straws. And I'm thinking to myself, this is crazy. I don't like a paper straw, but who cares? Why are you going to vote for Donald Trump over this? But I think something that I just didn't realize is what I thought was this game, was this performative, oh, we're going to attack the Democrats and say they're socialists and evil. A lot of my colleagues internalized it and have really come to either believe it or use it as a justification for their actions. There was one person I interviewed who said to me, Tim, I just, the way that the woke left is, that they're so crazy that it's left me no choice but to go along with Donald Trump on just the few things that I agree with him on. Like, I know that he's dangerous. I know that he's an idiot, but I have to do this because I felt no choice. That's a deeply broken mindset and a concerning mindset, and I fear that it is much broader than I had realized before I started doing these interviews.
I'm just interested in, the question of whether or not you're documenting on right, which is a kind of obsession, which you call it, and a slight going off the tracks with Donald Trump, is something you also see on the political left. I know that's not your job in this book, but you have a lot of experience with those on the left.
Yeah, my friend Liz Smith has a book out right now, and so you could bring her on in 2 weeks and ask her to hit the left. She was Pete Buttigieg's advisor. But here's my assessment of what's happening on the left. I think that there's some concerning similarities and some important differences. On the similarities, this culture of demonization that I talk about how every day, there's this kind of complicit, mutually beneficial relationship between political and media, where every day you have to give something to media about, oh, here's the crazy thing the Republicans did today, or here's the crazy thing this random conservative preacher said in Tennessee today, and like eventually, that radicalizes people. It radicalizes voters into thinking that that, oh, the right is so evil that maybe we have to do anti-democratic stuff in order to keep them out of power. I do worry a little bit about that happening on the left. And, Obama, to his credit, when he sort of emerged in '08, it was really about unity. It was about kind of racial unity, red states and blue states unity. I worry that a next Democratic Obama would not be about unity, but would be about divisiveness and that could make the powder keg in our culture worse. So I worry about that a little bit on the left. I think that there's some important differences. I think that liberal media, is much more policy oriented and less oriented around these kind of nihilistic trolling than you see in conservative media. I think that the Democratic voting base is just different categorically. It's much more diverse, both racially diverse, but also more diverse by education level, experience, and I think that has created some antibodies among kind of the left coalition that makes it less likely to say, all in lockstep, we're going to go behind a strong man who wants to beat the other side, because the people that are part of the Joe Biden coalition have much more, a diverse viewpoints. So I think that there's some concerning similarities, but some important differences.
I want to show you this poll that we have. It's done by Monmouth University, and it kind of measures what Americans think about, whether or not their political system is basically sound. And what it reports is from 1980, that number has fallen from basically America being, thinking their system is basically sound, from 62% then to about 36%, if you want to be generous, today. And that's a staggering drop. And that's saying overwhelmingly most Americans across all parties don't trust the system they're in. And I guess my question is, you've been in this. Is there anything that gives you hope that that's a number that can be turned around? Or are we, basically, as you said, on a nihilistic course, no matter what?
Yeah, we're still on the road to hell in the subtitle. No, this is not an optimistic book, really. It kind of leaves people in a place that of negative. I think I have a negative short-term view of all of this. I think that on the left, there's some legitimate concerns about the system. This is another key difference. Right now, we're dealing with what is essentially a tyranny of the minority, where the Republicans have won the popular vote one time in the 21st century, and yet control the Supreme Court, have a stranglehold on the Senate because of the imbalance. And I think that a lot of Democrats are becoming very frustrated with that system, I think for good reason. That on the Republican side, you have the voters are being lied to and being told that there's massive voter fraud. And I actually am sympathetic to the voters who continue to be told that there's voter fraud and that their country's being stolen from them. What do you expect them to think? So in order to change this trajectory that we're on, we need Republican leaders to be more responsible, stop lying to their own voters, and we need structural change in the way our democracy works to make people feel more confident that it works for them. And it's just hard to see either of those two things happening in the short term. Maybe in the medium term, I think hopefully the younger generation, like these are the core animating features of their activism. But I think that we're in for a little bit of a rocky road in the meantime.
I'm just interested in what made you so different to look at Donald Trump as someone you were not ready to sign on to when nearly everyone else you worked with either got out of the business or became an acolyte of his.
Yeah. Well, two things. I think the big self-criticism, as I would have said to myself in 2012, is that you need to actually listen to the voters in Republican politics and what they care about and what they're mad about. Because a lot of what you're doing is really compartmentalizing, and you're wanting the party to move to a place that you want it to go, but not that your voters want it to go. And in order to mollify them, you're feeding them red meat about a bunch of BS culture war nonsense. And I think that had the party, maybe tried to address their legitimate grievances about that forever wars, for example, about their communities being hollowed out because of trade. Maybe they wouldn't have turned to someone like Trump because they felt like they were being hurt. Maybe not, but I think that that's something that was worth trying that we didn't do. And then when the party goes awry, right, when we get overthrown by people who demand, that these culture war issues are put to the forefront. I think that the main thing that separated me from my colleagues was two things. One is it just was too far over my personal lines. And I don't know exactly, what made me that way. Maybe my mother, but it's just kind of too far over my personal lines. And I think that another part of it is being a gay person with a family. I think that my capacity for empathy was greater than some of my colleagues, and I think that like Donald Trump's cruelty really hit me in more of a personal place, where they came from more of a place of privilege, where more of a place of not that I'm not privileged, but that they weren't impacted by it in any real way, and so it became easy for them to compartmentalize his cruelty because it didn't affect them. It didn't affect their families. It only affected other people out there in the country, and so I think that I was in a lot of ways saved by the fact that I was gay and had that sort of broader view.
You name names and you talk to real people in this book, and there are three women that you sort of tell stories about in this and that you talk to. Elise Stefanik, who's now a very prominent member of Congress, very big Trump supporter, didn't start out that way, took on Liz Cheney in the role she had. Alyssa Farah, former communications director of the White House, worked for Mike Pence and also the Secretary of Defense. And the third is Carolyn Wren, who was also a big part of the Trump operating machine, particularly in the finance area. Can you just in a short form tell us about the journey of these three women, all of whom you knew for a considerable period of time, that went through different somersaults and who they became?
Yeah. It's funny. This shows you how little this is about policy and how much it is about personal integrity, and why I wanted to write this book, because Alyssa Farah was the most conservative out of those three women by a wide margin, and is, if you just look at their reviews as a policy checklist. But she was the one who said enough. She went along with Trump a little too far, and for my taste, way too far for my taste, to be honest. But during the Stop the Steal stuff before January 6th, she quit, and she's stuck with it and said, I cannot support someone that's going to undermine our democracy like this. And so I kind of explore what was the difference and what are the difference between these three women. And basically what it comes down to is Elise Stefanik was just blinded by ambition. She was extremely moderate, but she saw her path to power was through Trump, and that she could overthrow Liz Cheney, who was much more conservative than her, as long as she went along with these nonsense conspiracies. And so her friends who I interviewed are like, what happened to her? And I tell them it's an uncomfortable truth. What happened to her is that she decided that she needed to lie for power, and that power was more important to her than these other traits. Whereas Alyssa, I think was able to kind of step back and have a broader view, because she didn't have that same opportunity or the same interest that Elise did. She was able to see, I don't want my kids to judge me for being part of this, for being complicit in this. And I care more about, about doing the right thing than I do about one more rung up the ladder. And I think Caroline is a little bit in a different category, because she's been really sucked in by the Trump cult in a lot of ways. And so I think that the lesson from these three stories I try to get at is that in order to pull people away from Trump, we have to talk to them about things that are not just a policy checklist. It's about these broader values and broader principles, and are there ways that we can look at our own integrity and look at our own choices and make choices that in the future aren't as dangerous. And I think Alyssa is the only kind of optimistic model that I present for that, and she's really a stark contrast from Elise in particular.
We're right near the end of at least this phase of the January 6th hearings. And if we learned anything from those hearings, in my view, it is that the distance between the President of the United States and what was going on amongst those protesters who raided and attacked the U.S. Capitol was nil, that the President wanted to actually storm the Capitol with them, according to reports from those hearings. I'm interested in what you think about this moment, because I think the nightmare some people have is that we can have all of this play out. We can see people who may have lied or fudged the truth. We may have had direct presidential and White House involvement in helping to stir this up, and to in the cases it could have led to the greater numbers of deaths than we already had there. And the American, at least one big part of the American public, might not care. They may still want Donald Trump as the leader of this country. I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, see, this is where we come back to the fact that leadership and choices do matter. Like, history is contingent. This stuff is not inevitable. And we're learning more from the January 6th committee, but it was clear that Donald Trump was complicit in this on the night of January 6th. And Lindsey Graham admitted it. Mitch McConnell admitted it. And so these guys had the courage to vote to convict in the Senate on the second impeachment, then we wouldn't be here anymore. And by the way, the Republican Party would be in a better position. They could have just been ready to move on to Ron DeSantis or Mike Pence or whoever. And so I just think that this is such what we're learning just reveals that these questions that are at the heart of protecting our democracy are about individual integrity, individual choices, and separating ourselves from this really kind of debased, tribal culture of Washington, D.C., and recognizing that, sometimes you have to take some short-term political risks to do the right thing to make change. Look at what just happened in the U.K., how they overthrew Boris Johnson. That is what is required here. And the only people, unfortunately, that can do it are the Republican leaders. And I think to put this on voters is wrong. Like a lot of the voters believe what they believe about January 6th because they've been lied to, and so we don't exactly know what they would think about our democracy if leaders had stood up and done the right thing.
Now, remind our audience, Donald Trump did tweet out in mid-December, "Be there, will be wild," foreknowledge, essentially, or at least for stirring up of the mix. But it just raises this interesting question as we look forward to the solvency of this system, as we look forward to the next thing. Is there a place in the Republican Party anymore for people like yourself, for Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, other people that were part of what you put together in the Lincoln Project with Steve Schmidt and others, people, and I don't even know if you're still friends with all these folks, but you helped drive at least a big portion of the Never Trump Republican movement. Does that movement have any future, or has it fizzled out?
Yeah, just for a fact, I did Republican Voters Against Trump, which is a different thing than the Lincoln Project. But yeah, no, it's okay. We're all allies in an effort to stop Donald Trump, which is the most important thing. No, look, right now, I don't think that there's a place for the Never Trumpers in the Republican Party. Maybe there will be in the future for some of us. But I left the party in November. I think that there has to be a broad pro-democracy coalition right now that extends from people who are more to the left of us, and I think some of us are demonstrating that we're willing to make sacrifices for that on various policy things. I hope people on the left are as well, in order to deal with this grave threat. And I think that, to my point about Alyssa and Elise, this is not about policy differences right now. This is about, are you willing to go along and continue humoring a madman who wanted to end our democracy and then put in place a Donald Trump autocracy, or are you not? And if you're not, then right now, even if you disagree with Joe Biden on some policies, you're part of the Joe Biden coalition. And that's my view. And maybe that'll change when Donald Trump's off the stage. I don't have a crystal ball, but no, for now, I think Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are the last stand. And unfortunately, she's about to lose her primary, and he's going to retire from Congress. And unfortunately, we might have to fight this fight again in 2024 if Trump runs again. It seems like he will.
Well, Tim Miller, former Republican strategist and author of Why We Did It, a travelogue from the Republican road to hell. Really appreciate your candor, and thanks for being with us today.
Happy to do it, Steve.
So what's the bottom line? American democracy is going through one of its strangest periods ever. Millions of Americans simply don't believe that Joe Biden is the president. If you ask them for proof, they don't have any, but they've got that gut feeling. Conspiracies fly around, and no two Americans can agree on anything, whether it's immigration, abortion, sexuality and identity, you name it. It doesn't even matter if the January 6th Commission finds that Donald Trump failed to uphold the Constitution and was willing to do just about anything to stay in power. Folks have already made up their minds. End of discussion. And things are not going to get much better. The enablers that my guest talks about are ready for the next gravy train, whether it's the Trump train or any other populist candidate that promises to pull the country back from moderates and progressives. In today's America, winning elections is what's important, not uniting or healing the country. Wait. Let me be clear. That isn't the way things should be, but it's where we are now. America's democracy may be hanging on by only a few threads. And that's the bottom line.